Hello and welcome back to the Lorcana Twins YouTube channel, where today we will be discussing Disney Lorcana trading card games, cards that have been revealed so far, and we are going to analyze them from an anatomy standpoint, from an effect standpoint, and also we are going to touch on some gameplay assumptions that we have regarding how we think this game will be played, because as everyone knows who has been following this game, the full rules and basically hardly any of the rules have been revealed to us so far by the game makers. So we're still waiting for that, but until then, we can give our best guess at how the game will function.
Yep, and before we get into that, just a quick shout out to the team at Lorcania.com for providing the community with this great resource that we're able to use and view the cards that have been revealed so far.
Yes, so we are going to start out first discussing the anatomy of a card. We'll start by looking at Captain Hook. He's the card on the left there. In the upper left corner of his card is a 1 number, and that is surrounded by a golden swirl or a flourish. And essentially that looks to be a cost of 1, and then the golden flourish, we think we have an idea what that actually means.
Yep, there's been a lot of speculation in the community so far about what it could be, and a lot of theories floating around. So yeah, I mean, there's merit to a lot of them, but we have our own theory, which we'll get into later, so stay tuned for that.
Absolutely. And then underneath that, you can see there's a great looking picture of Captain Hook. He looks very sinister. Mm-hmm. The artwork's beautiful. Then we've got his name in big letters, and under that he has some subtext calling him a forceful duelist. Next to that, there is a 1 in kind of a sunburst symbol that looks to be possibly his strength, and then a 2 in what looks to be a shield is likely his defense. Under that, it has a banner with the steel symbol, and in that banner it says he is Dreamborn, Villain, Pirate, and Captain. So those are some descriptors for him.
And then as you can see, he has an ability called Challenger +2, which says while challenging, this character gets +2 to the strength attribute.
So that kind of leads into, how does a character go about challenging another character? It would seem that if you exert Captain Hook when it's your turn, or essentially turn him sideways or tap him, as other games like to call this, then he can target an opposing character, essentially in a challenge, where you'll compare the strength of Captain Hook versus the defense of the opposing character, and vice versa, to see who comes out on top in essentially a battle.
And here's where a couple assumptions come in. So one, we feel like you can only probably challenge a character, also known as a glimmer, when it's your turn and the opposing glimmer is already exerted. We don't think you can attack or challenge an unexerted character, but it could be wrong, we'll see. But that's an assumption we're going off of. And also we think then the damage that the glimmers will do to each other in combat happens simultaneously. So if Captain Hook, let's say, were to be challenging Tinkerbell, you can see he's got a strength of 1, but because he'd be the one challenging, he'd get his +2 effect, and he would, effectively take away 3 of Tinkerbell's defense, and she's at 4, and then she would return 2 damage to him at the same time. So it would seem that he would not win that fight, but we'll have to wait and see to be 100% sure on that, but that's what we're assuming.
That all seems pretty fair game. The other thing, though, why we think that you can't challenge something that isn't exerted, this just creates more opportunity for players to be strategic with how they're using their characters or their glimmers.
When it's safe to exert them and when
it's
not.
Captain Hook most likely is not going to make himself vulnerable if an opponent can easily trade him out when it's not your turn, versus the point of him might be to leave him on board until there's a character that the opponent has that he can do 3 damage to and take off the board or banish.
He's kind of menacing and threatening in that way, whereas they only invested 1 cost to play Captain Hook, so it would feel bad to lose a 2, 3, 4 cost unit with maybe only 3 health or whatever to a Captain Hook. But if they leave him on the board, he can threaten that possibility. So,
and there's one other card that's been revealed so far, which we'll touch on later, that we think provides some evidence that likely supports the idea that you will only be able to attack characters that are exerted. But it's not hard proof of it, but we think it decently supports that theory. The other point that we want to get across is, how do you win this game? Well, the game makers themselves have pointed out that these characters go on quests for lore, and it suggests that in order to win, you may need to obtain a certain amount of lore, and these symbols on the right hand side of the text box on the cards that look kind of like diamonds, those we believe are lore symbols. And so Captain Hook has one, Gantu has two, Tinkerbell has one. So the other idea that we have here about how you might actually obtain the lore is that, instead of Captain Hook basically tapping himself to do a challenge, he could decide to tap himself to quest for that lore. And so then if Captain Hook survives through your opponent's next turn, when his turn starts, he would unexert, and then you would collect the amount of lore that's displayed on his card.
Right. We think that would give the opponent a chance to have some counterplay, to try to, let's say, challenge and banish Captain Hook, or banish him through an action card or some other means to prevent you from collecting that lore. So it gives him a chance to stop you, instead of just if you were able to collect the lore right away at the end of your turn. So we think that provides them some counterplay.
Yes, absolutely, because the idea of, if you have to make him vulnerable, it gives the opponent a chance to interact, a chance to be strategic, to use their cards in order to deal with him, versus just, if the game played where he just commits and immediately gets his one lore, exerts himself and immediately collects that lore, it wouldn't give your opponent any way to interact with him or stop you from getting closer to your win condition. So this seems like probably the best way to just make it a little more of an even playing field. Really force each person to decide, when can I go for lore, when do I need to leave my character unexerted, when should I just use my card effect and use it in battle instead. A lot of things to consider. So with kind of that out of the way, we'd like to start diving into the cards now.
Yep. So we touched on Hook, but there is one more thing to point out. He's got the symbol at the bottom center of the card, and that looks to be the common rarity. So
yeah, so he's probably gonna show up a little more frequently in your booster box or your booster packs if you're getting some of that. So yeah, let's take a good look at him. He costs 1. He's a steel color, as are all the cards on this page. He's got 1 strength, 2 defense, as we said before, but of course the challenger effect, if it's your turn and you're using him in a challenge, he essentially becomes a 3 strength for 2 defense character.
So he seems like a good option to have like in the early game, and he threatens some units if they have 3 defense or less. So he could be a good thing to have on board for some board presence early to help you control the board and then move into the middle game.
I would guess most likely you'd want to use him to kind of take out some of their middle range threats. Like anything with 3 defense would be a great target for Captain Hook to go after. So he's probably not going to quest for lore very much. I would guess he's more for the combat, because of his combat buff that he gets. He
probably doesn't want to find himself on the defensive end of a challenge, since he'll only return 1 damage. And most units we've seen, I don't think we've seen a unit that has just 1 defense yet. So
nope.
Let's move on to Gantu now, which was one of the most recent reveals so far. He is an 8 cost. He does have the Flourish symbol as well. He's got 6 strength and 6 defense, some of the biggest numbers we've seen, and an ability called Under Arrest that says characters with cost 2 or less can't challenge your characters. So this has some potentially strong implications for the game. As you can see already, Captain Hook would be unable to challenge a Gantu based on that effect.
Yeah, so really, I think this is it's a strong effect, but what it doesn't do is stop characters that cost 2 or less from questing for lore. So that's one thing they could still do even if he's on the board,
assuming it is a thing. But...
yeah, yes, assuming that's a thing. And then the other thing to point out with him is he's 2 lore. He has 2 lore on his card, so he's a bit expensive, I guess, for 2 lore, because as we'll see later, there's a lot of cards that have 2 lore on them that are a lot less than 8 cost. And whether or not your opponent is using a lot of 2 or less costs, that's kind of going to be situational in the matchup that you're playing. So there's definitely situations where his effect isn't going to do you much, and then maybe he's a bit overpriced at that 8 cost.
It still remains to be seen, though. Are we gaining, 1 resource, let's say, per turn, or is it ramping faster than that, like maybe 2 resources per turn? Like, will we have to wait 8 turns to play Gantu, or is there a way to get him out sooner? We are kind of assuming just 1 resource system based on what we've seen so far, and so he is a later game unit, so it remains to be seen, like, by turn 8, does your opponent even have many 2 cost or less on the board? Is the effect going to do much? I guess we'll have to find out.
And of course, it might be that you gain 2 resources every turn. Maybe it's like you start with 1 and then you go to 3 and 5, or if you go second, you start with 2 and 4 and 6. Like, that's kind of how One Piece plays. So I wouldn't be surprised if this game did something like that, just to kind of speed the game up a little more. But yeah, even so, it'll really depend on, is your opponent using a lot of those cards, because part of the cost of playing this card is you're paying for that effect, and so you hope that you get some value from that effect. And I think it looks like there's going to be ways to play around it, but it could be very strong, so it will be interesting to find out how impactful he is. And he does appear to be a legendary card.
Yes, that symbol on the bottom center of his card is the legendary symbol, and I think the art, it's very epic. I love how, if you notice, like, these are all steel cards, so they do try to work that steel color into the background of the cards a lot and feature that in the art, so that's pretty neat to see. And you can tell he's in some tropical jungle area, and he looks like he's, I don't know, about to enter some combat or standing his ground against a big threat or something, but it's pretty epic and actionist, and I like it a lot.
Yes, and now I get to talk about Simba, and as you can see, it's a blank card at this point, so there's not much to say here other than he is one of the starter deck characters from the Steel Sapphire deck. So this will come in foil if you get the starter deck, and then because we know Aurora is a Floodborn super rare card, we'll see her later, and the other starter deck that has Corella, she's a rare. So we assume each starter deck will have a super rare paired with a rare that are in foil. So therefore, we think Simba will be a rare card, and will he, and not Floodborn, because Aurora is Floodborn. So this will probably be just either a Dreamborn or a Storyborn format.
Right, and I do like how, despite it being a steel card, the colors on Simba are really popping and vibrant, and so, it's cool to see.
Yeah, he looks strong. He looks like he's probably gonna lend itself well to an aggressive deck, or we'll have to see what his effects are, but pretty excited about him.
Yep, and then we have Tinkerbell, who was the newest revealed card at this point, and she is a 3 cost and a 2 strength, 4 defense unit with the effect Battle Plans. You may exert Tinkerbell to draw a card, then choose and discard a card. So I like this ability a lot. I mean, depending on what stage of the game you're in, you can look at your hand and get rid of a card that's no longer serving your purposes. I mean, maybe you're on turn 1 and you've got a 9 cost card, and there's no way you're going to play that anytime soon. So, you want to search for something you can play. Or maybe you're late game and you've got a handful of low cost cards that are going to be pretty low impact at that stage, and you want to look for one of your higher cost cards. I think she's just going to be a great way to get through your deck faster. Maybe you're running a combo deck, so you could find some of your combo pieces. She is coming in at a common and appears to have a value of 1 lore on the right side. So, and gorgeous art again. Really impressed by all the art so far.
Yeah, and before we go to the next ink, this would be a good time just to mention, in the banner of each ink, it'll say Storyborn, Dreamborn, or Floodborn. And so on this page, you can see Captain Hook is a Dreamborn, and Tinkerbell is also a Dreamborn. So that means they're slightly changed from the original form that we know from the movie that it comes from. So here you can see Captain Hook. He's got it looks like almost a sword or something for an arm instead of a hook. And then Tinkerbell, she's in some battle armor. So not exactly how we saw them before. And Gantu is Storyborn, so that is coming basically directly from the original source material, straight from the story. And we will see Floodborn later, and we can touch on that when we do.
All right, so now that we have covered the steel, we will move on to Amethyst.
And Amethyst appears to have the most number of reveals so far.
Mm-hmm.
And starting off with the wardrobe, this is a card with no effect. Just some nice flavor text down there. She's got some hot couture, if you like that. But anyway, she's a 3 cost for 3 strength and 4 defense. So slightly improved stat line, maybe over other glimmers of this cost, but the trade-off is that it has no effect.
Right.
And White Rabbit's Pocket Watch is the next card on the screen.
Now this card, I love the art on it. First of all, it's very whimsical. It reminds me so much of the movie, and I like kind of the interesting glow and shadow effects on the flowers around the pocket watch. But when this card was revealed, this did kind of give us some clues into the gameplay. It has a 3 cost with a flourish and then an ability, I'm late. You can exert it and pay a resource, and then chosen character gains rush this turn. They can challenge the turn they're played. So that lets us know that most units or glimmers, when they hit the board, they cannot challenge opposing units like the same turn. They have to wait around a turn. But with this pocket watch, you can kind of cheat around that summoning sickness that it's sometimes referred to and give them rush so that they can challenge right away. And I think, it might be slower up front to invest in this over investing in, let's say, a different glimmer, different unit. But once it's on the board, then every turn thereafter, you can give any unit you play rush as long as you have the resources to pay for it. So that seems like it could be potentially very strong, especially at controlling the board.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this is going to be a big deal. And also, this is the first item we've revealed here. So the items, it appears that it will sit on your board as kind of a permanent fixture. There, who knows, there's probably going to be some cards where you can remove items.
Mm-hmm.
Difficult to say. But for now, looks like you can just play this right onto the board and it'll sit there so that every turn you have the opportunity to exert it to give one thing rush.
Right. I feel like this could be a super strong card, so I would feel like there's probably some way to combat it or counter it or maybe remove it. Because I think it probably wouldn't feel very good if you're just forced to
if there's never any way to interact
right,
with
if you just have to accept that your opponent played it, now you have to deal with it for the whole rest of the game. It might be a very niche or techie way to remove it, and maybe you include something in your deck that could do that, maybe you don't, depending on how the rest of the set shapes up. But yeah, I think this card particularly could be super strong, one of the strongest cards we've seen potentially, just based on the things that it could help other cards pull off. And maybe we'll touch on some of those synergies as they come up, but yeah, that's the pocket watch.
All right, moving on, we have Elsa, Snow Queen. She costs 3 and she has a 2/3 stat line, and her effect is that you can exert her to exert a chosen opposing character. Now this is really the card that I was referencing earlier when I said it might give clues about why we think you can only challenge a character that's already exerted. Because one thing Elsa could then do is exert an opponent's character that you want to target that was maybe previously untargetable because it wasn't exerted, and now your other characters can attack that exerted character. The other thing it might be able to do is if they do put blockers into the game, or units that can, like, let's say my Mickey Mouse attacks the enemy's Robin Hood, but then that Robin Hood player has let's say a Dumbo on their side of the field, and Dumbo's a blocker, well, they could maybe choose to exert Dumbo so that the attack is redirected at Dumbo and protects the Robin Hood. But in this case, a strategic thing you could use Elsa for would be to exert Elsa to exert Dumbo so that now your Mickey can attack their Robin Hood, and get around the blocker. So a couple different potential uses for Elsa there.
And perhaps some glimmers have abilities that perhaps are static or that could be used on their turn as long as their character is active, and so exerting them would be a way to turn that ability off. Not sure if we've seen any examples of that yet, but it's a possibility.
So yeah, going back to the combat utility of Elsa, then that would kind of help the player with Elsa control the board better, because you could exert characters that might be problematic if they're left up, left alive, and then you could exert that character and kind of make sure that your characters can banish it, whereas otherwise the opponent might purposefully be leaving it unexerted so that it's not targetable.
So she definitely seems like she's got some control aspects about her, and I think the Amethyst ink so far in general seems like it's got some real control vibes.
And then her symbol on the bottom middle of the black part of the card, it looks like an open book, and so far that's presumed to be like an uncommon rarity, so the circle being common and the book being uncommon.
So next we have Olaf, Friendly Snowman, with the cost of 1 with the Flourish, and then 1 strength and 3 defense. And he says, I'm Olaf and I like warm hugs. And just a quick note about that, it looks like above the flavor text, there's a little open book icon. And some in the community have discovered that they believe that means it's a direct quote from the source material, whereas if it has a pen icon, like the Elsa card does, then that flavor text is more just, newly invented based on maybe the Lorcana game or the Lorcana lore, or just something brand new. So
I do remember him saying that quote, so that seems very believable to me.
Yeah, and so not much to say about Olaf other than it is possible he has some lore. When the card was revealed, that part of the card that normally features the lore was covered up. So just because we don't see it here, he might in fact have lore, and we are kind of assuming every
I think we assume every character will, because it seems like
that's part of the win condition.
In most cases you would want your cards to have some value towards your win condition if this is something you draw and you don't have anything else,
right. And he doesn't have an ability either, so in combat stat wise, 1 for 1 3, I mean it's not going to do much offensively, and if it's not gaining you any lore, unless it somehow ties in with some other card's effects, it doesn't seem like it would be getting you much in the way of, progressing toward your win condition. So we are assuming he probably does have a lore. And I just want to say, despite, the image being depicted of, kind of a cold place, it looks like a really warm, nice, friendly image that really captures the vibe of Olaf, and I just love the artwork on this one.
Absolutely. Now moving on to Magic Mirror, this is another item card, and this time it does not have the Flourish in the upper left next to around the cost. So again, we're going to touch on that later, but for now we will just say that this effect, it looks like the item will stay on your board, and on your turn you can exert this card and pay 4 resources to draw a card. So most TCGs, card draw and card advantage is a big deal. It does seem like initially this looks very expensive, but the more turns you're able to use the Magic Mirror, the more advantage you will get out of it, and it'll definitely pay for itself over time. And especially if you think of a late game scenario where everyone is just kind of top decking or drawing 1 card at a time and hoping you get something good, Magic Mirror is kind of a backup plan to say, I get to draw 2 cards per turn, assuming you only draw 1 card at the start of your turn. This would let you draw, twice the usual amount in one turn.
You can outvalue your opponent in the late game.
Yes.
So yeah, depending on how many cards, the more cards you are able to draw off of it, then the cheaper each card becomes, respectively. So it could be potentially, great value if it helps you get through your deck and get to those important cards that'll help you win the game.
Yep, it just depends if games are going to be winnable too early for the Magic Mirror to really get that long-term value, or if decks that are super control based are going to be able to slow the game down and then put Magic Mirror to some good use. So.
It does seem like it fits in with the Amethyst theme so far, with Elsa being kind of control based, and then the White Rabbit's Pocket Watch enabling you to rush in some units to help clean up the board while you progress toward your late game and ramping up to that. So looks like a lot of potential there. And then lastly, we have Sorcerer Mickey, who again, nothing much revealed in terms of cost or stats, but it is very cool art, and he looks like he's about to go off to battle or something, and there's some paintbrushes carrying different colored inks in the background.
And then also he is one of the two starter deck includes for the Amethyst Amber that is featured. So my assumption is he's the Floodborn of the two. You know, it's Mickey and Moana.
Mm-hmm.
I would venture to say he's probably the Floodborn, and Moana, and therefore a super rare. Mm-hmm. And Moana is probably rare and not Floodborn.
Yeah, if you see like with Aurora, who we will get to, there's a lot of ink swirling around the character in the color of the card, and you know, Mickey, you can see there's a little bit of amethyst colored ink swirling around him, and he seems to be wearing the amethyst symbol. So again, that leads us to believe he's probably the super rare Floodborn of the starter deck, and Moana will be the rare. But you know, for now, that's all we can do is speculate.
All right, moving on to the next ink. This will be Amber, and Amber has 4 cards showing right now. The first being Hades, King of Olympus. And he is the only character so far that around his cost does not have a flourish. We do expect there will be more that do not, but for now he's all we have. He is a 6/7 stat line, so 7 is the highest defense that's been revealed at this point. And in this card, he is a Floodborn. So now would be a good time to touch on what Floodborn is. Floodborn is essentially when a character's story has progressed down an alternate path that it did not take in the original film and is vastly different from the original. So here, you know, Hades has become the king of Olympus, whereas in the film, he is the king of the underworld, and he may aspire to that position, but he never attains, you know, the position of being the king of Olympus.
Right, he launches an attack with the Titans, and it does fail in the end. So this is kind of playing out, well, what if he did become the king of Olympus? And so that's cool to see that they're envisioning, you know, alternate realities or alternate paths for the characters we know and love, and reimagining them in different, unique ways.
Now, because he's Floodborn, it appears every Floodborn character will have this shift ability. So his says shift 6, and that means instead of paying the normal 8 cost, if you already have a character named Hades on your side of the field, you can play this Hades on top for the reduced cost of 6. And it appears all the Floodborns that have been revealed so far, the shift is 2 cost less than the regular cost in the upper left. So basically a reduction of 2.
Also interesting to note that the bar underneath his name and subtitle is black, whereas if you can see the card to the right, Healing Glow, the bar under the name of the card matches the ink color. So there are different theories about that as well.
Now Hades has an effect, Sinister Plot. He gets 1 lore for every other villain character you have in play. So that's in addition to the 1 lore he already has. So this card basically gets better the more villains you have in play. And there may be a cap. I'm assuming there's probably a cap to how many, you know, characters you can have on the field at one time. Mm-hmm. A lot of games do cap it off. Usually like around 5, something like that. Totally, it's not revealed. 5. It's not revealed yet in this game, but I do think they probably want to, you know, have some boundaries in place and before things just get like too many characters to deal with or to think about. So I would say 5 is probably reasonable. But if that turns out to be true, then he could be worth potentially 5 lore because he gets 1 additional lore for every other villain.
Right, and that would be the most lore we've seen on any character so far. So he's a really cool card, I think, because like it just creates this potential for him to be worth a lot more. And you know, if you're sitting across from that card, then all of a sudden every other villain on the board is just kind of boosting him up, and it creates this pressure to try to deal with them and get rid of a lot of their lower villains or remove Hades, whatever, to stop this big threat from, you know, reaching his full potential.
Yeah, so he seems really fun. I'm sure a lot of people will try to build a deck around, you know, this concept right here, just how many villains can I get in play.
And it's cool, he is featured in the gift set in foil, so you know, you can guaranteed just pick up that product and have him in your collection.
Next we have Healing Glow, which is an action card. So this presumably you will play out of your hand on your turn. It says remove up to 2 damage from chosen character. So this really pointed out to a lot of people that damage will stick on the character after it's been taken. So again, if Hades, let's say he gets attacked by Mickey, Mickey is a 5/5, so Hades will survive with 2 health, but then if you use Healing Glow on Hades, he'll go back up to 4 health. So basic, pretty simple card there, just removing 2 damage counters from one character of your choice.
Yes, and then we have Stitch, which I know he's a lot of people's favorite characters. I'm a big fan of Stitch myself. This one is coming to us in a Floodborn type. He is Stitch Rockstar, so it's a different look at Stitch than what we've seen.
Yeah, he is rocking out, and I really do like the art on this card. I think it's really fun.
He looks really happy, and he's having a good time putting on a show. But he is a 6 cost and 3 strength, 5 defense. So his stats for a cost of 6 maybe are on the lower side, but his effects are amazing. And as you can see, he's got shift of 4. So you could actually potentially get him out for a cost of 4 if you can play him on another Stitch.
But in which case his stat line looks a lot better, and the 3 lore that's got to be worth a lot.
Absolutely,
in my opinion, because so far only Mickey has 4, and already if you could get this out for 4 costs and have 3 lore at your disposal,
it seems pretty strong. And then his ability is Adoring Fans. Whenever you play a character with cost 2 or less, you may exert them to draw a card. So he opens up a lot of potential for dropping a lot of smaller cost units and then refilling your hand and trying to outvalue your opponent that way. Because if a lot of your units are challenging theirs or they're challenging yours to clear them off, then at least you drew a card for everyone you played and your opponent presumably didn't. So then you can try to pull ahead that way. And just a little synergy perhaps. You could use him to play a lot of smaller cost villains, let's say, to help boost up a Hades, for example. I'm not sure right now if that would be the best strategy or not.
Of course, he's a hero, so he wouldn't count towards the Hades buff, but something to consider. You could drop a bunch of Cruella de Vil's. We'll see her in just a little bit.
Right, we do think that would be some good synergy, but yeah, more on that a little later.
And then he's looks to be a super rare. So definitely a card that looks like he will probably have some good impact. And then we have Moana off to the right. Again, she is in the Amethyst and Amber starter deck alongside that Mickey. So assuming she's going to be a rare card, and really don't know anything about her effects or costs, so we will just have to wait and see what they did with her.
Looks like she's probably Storyborn. It looks like she's about ready to set off on her quest, about to leave the island, but that's all we know about her so far. But yeah, we will get into the next color.
So Emerald is a lot lighter so far on the reveals, just 3. Cruella de Vil being alongside Aladdin in the starter deck, the red Aladdin, which we'll see later. But Cruella de Vil, she costs 2. She is a 1/3 stat line. She has the rare triangle symbol on the bottom of the card. And then her effect, You'll Be Sorry. If she is challenged and banished, then the player controlling Cruella may return another character to the player's hand. So this seems to be kind of an annoying card, I think, to deal with.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for this one to annoy the opponent when it hits the board, just knowing that at any point, if you do try to banish her, then they can return any of your characters to your hand. Perhaps, a good strategy would be to try to remove her as early as possible before you've played more expensive things, because that would give the Cruella player a lot more value if they're bouncing back, something you invested 5 or 6 costs to play when she only costs 2.
Yeah, it seems like Cruella's function might be that she can just quest for lore every turn to go after that one lore until the opponent finally says, I need to get rid of her because I can't give you free lore every turn. But so you really don't want to wait too long, and then you've already played some really big minions down that they can just bounce back to your hand. So like what my brother said, a good example would be if you have Captain Hook right in the early game, I would just say, swing into her, trade out with Cruella, and then Hook would survive that trade actually. and then she could bounce him back, but he only costs 1, so it's not really a huge setback to you to just pay 1 to play him again.
Right. Of course, they could always, a player could play Cruella later in the game when you've already got good stuff on board. But then perhaps they just never target it, unless there's a way for them to force you to challenge Cruella and banish her, then, she might not be able to get that effect off. So it's a potentially annoying card you're going to have to strategically work around the effect of, but I think it's really cool and adds some fun strategic elements to the game, and I'm happy to see an ability like that, even though, it might be frustrating at times. But
yeah, and the important thing about her too is like it only happens if she gets challenged. So the Cruella player cannot just challenge into something, lose that challenge, and then banish something. It has to be that she is the one that is attacked. Now moving on to Jumba, he does not have any effects. He is a 5 cost for a 4/5 stat line, and then he has 2 lore. So
he has pretty good stats for the cost, and having 2 lore, no effect. But
decent stats, but as we'll see, Mulan later also costs 5 and has the same exact stats as Jumba, but then she does have 1 less lore, but she has an effect that could potentially give you an exponential amount of lore gain to go above what Jumba can offer. So I think that's probably going to be a common card, whereas Mulan is, super rare, and just showing how, cards without effects usually
have beefier
don't
stats.
Offer much other than the stats themselves.
Which could be very important in this game. We don't know, but in terms of controlling the board, I would think it would be. And I am curious to see when the full gameplay and set details are released, like how many vanilla cards like Jumbo will find their place in a deck and what the optimal number might be. But stat-wise, seems pretty decent.
And also, like different ink colors might have different typical stat lines. So it's possible that in Emerald, maybe 4 or 5 is a pretty beefy number compared to the other Emerald cards, or maybe it's kind of run of the mill across the inks.
And also, he might not have an ability, but he is Dreamborn, Alien, and Inventor subtypes. So perhaps there's cards that give synergies to Alien cards, and then that might incentivize you to run Jumba in the deck as well. So more to find out as we see more cards revealed. Lastly, in Emerald so far, we have Aladdin.
I just got to say, this is one of my favorite looking cards so far. I love the green and all the different colors on this. It really seems to pop for me. But
yeah, they did a great job recreating Aladdin in Prince Ali form from the film, and it's a 2 cost with stats of 2 strength and 2 defense. So not the best stat line we've seen, but he does have an ability called Ward, which says opponents can't choose this character except to challenge. So that's interesting. There are action cards in the game and also other abilities that would allow you to target glimmers, but he is not able to be targeted by anything other than a challenge. So they do have to take him out in combat, and his stats don't look too great, so that doesn't seem like it'd be too much of a challenge just based on what we're seeing. But
there may be ways to buff this card,
right,
give it more strength, more defense,
and then he could be really annoying to deal with.
And another thing to consider is the red and green starter deck has an Aladdin character, which we assume will be Floodborn, and so the Floodborn mechanic of shift lets you play, presumably the red Aladdin can be played on top of this one, and so it might be like this ward effect could prevent the opponent from just removing it with a spell, and then if you don't attack with Aladdin, he's actually safe, assuming you can't target something that isn't exerted.
And then you're able to shift him into the
you can just
more strong version.
Yes, your Aladdin will sit there warded up and protected, and then you can play the other one on top.
So we're kind of assuming that this will be in that starter deck with the other Aladdin, which we will be looking at in a little bit. And then I guess one more thing to touch on with Cruella is that she could synergize well with Hades, like we were mentioning earlier, because she is a villain, and Hades increases his lore count based on villains in play, and because she's kind of an annoying one that the opponent won't want to remove, but when she's on board with Hades, all of a sudden, they'll want to remove her because she's worth, giving him an extra lore point, but then, when you remove her, then it hurts their board as well. So I don't know. We see some potential synergies there.
Yes. Now we will move on to the Sapphire Cards, of which there are 4. We have Aurora. Again, she's in one of the starter decks. She is a 5-cost Floodborn character, 3/5 stat line, and she has shift 3. So again, the shift is always so far 2 less than the regular cost. You can play her on top of another character named Aurora, and then her effect, Protective Embrace, gives your other characters that ward keyword, meaning the other characters cannot be chosen by your opponent except in a challenge. So again, they can't be targeted by on-play effects from other characters. They can't be targeted by actions or, presumably effects on items. So the only way to get rid of those would be in a combat challenge. And so I think that effect seems like it would be really good at insulating, your board against actions and other, on-play effects. It just really forces them to win the board against you because they can't target those other characters any other way. So
yeah, it seems like a good way to protect all your other units. And from the cards that have been revealed so far and the fact that Steel is paired with Sapphire in the starter decks, it's beginning to look like a pretty aggressive color combination, I think.
Yep.
Just especially with Captain Hook, for an early game in the Steel. And imagine you play out, a lot of lower cost units to begin with and get good board control, and then you play Aurora and protect those from, all targets except, their characters challenging them. I think that's a good way to protect them. And then there's more, as we'll see with some of the rest of the Sapphire cards, that would seem to indicate maybe an aggressive, tempo play style.
Then one thing I thought to point out too about ward is that it wouldn't protect your other units from like area of effect spells or spells that don't target things but just hit the board as a whole.
We haven't really seen any of those revealed
Let's
yet,
imagine maybe from Mulan, the avalanche scene, when the mountain, the avalanche happens and it just crushes a bunch of people in its path. Maybe there's an avalanche card, like an action that does 2 or 3, to every unit on the field. Like that would be a way to target things that aren't necessarily targetable because of the ward.
Right.
But we've yet to see any cards of that nature that just do like area of effect damage.
I wouldn't be surprised if there are some, because sometimes in games you want a way to kind of reset a board if you've fallen way behind, and that would be a way to do that. But
Yep.
Yeah, we will see. So then we have Robin Hood, who's a 6 cost for 4/4 in the stat line, and he has a couple of abilities. One is Feed the Poor. When you play this character, if an opponent has more cards in their hand than you, draw a card. So that kind of plays into the theory of this being kind of potentially an aggressive color, where maybe you've played out a lot of cards at this point and you've tried to protect them with Aurora, and now you're running low on cards and you play him, and then you have less than your opponent, so you get to draw a card.
Yep.
So stat wise for 6 costs, the 4/4 is maybe not the best that we've seen, but that card draw ability has big potential. He's also got 2 lore, and then his other ability is Good Shot. During your turn, this character gains evasive, which means they can challenge characters with evasive. So as we're going to see in the ruby color, there's Mickey Brave Little Tailor card, which has evasive, and I'm sure there are many others in the set, or at least a few others, that have evasive, and basically those can't be challenged. So if we're dealing with the win condition we were thinking of, where you exert a card to go on the quest for lore, if an evasive character does that and you have, let's say, no action cards or abilities in your hand to take them out, and you need to take them out via challenge, it'll be helpful to have a character like Robin Hood who has the ability to challenge evasive units. Otherwise, they can just collect the lore free of charge. So
unfortunately, this Robin Hood is not evasive on your opponent's turn, so he can be targeted by anything. And I think that might be a weakness because his stat line of 4/4 is pretty low, but I think that's being offset by the fact that he's got the 2 lore, the ability to go evasive when he needs it, and the ability to draw a card if you're already kind of dumping your hand at a quicker rate than your opponent.
I suppose if there are ways to increase stats, bump him up to a 5/5 or a 6/6, then you could kind of hold on to him defensively in case the opponent played something like a Mickey, and use him to clear out some evasive units as well. But he is looking like an aggressive tempo-y type of card, for the most part.
Yes, now we have Maleficent next, and nothing is really revealed about this card, so it's hard to speculate what she might do. But so I'll just say that I really like the art, and she's casting some magic out of her staff, and she's got her trusty crow on the shoulder. So yeah, I think I'm a big fan of the character of Maleficent, so I'm very excited to see what this one does, and I love all the other blue cards that are revealed, so I'm assuming it's going to have a nice effect. And next to that we have Scar, who's probably one of my favorite 3 cards revealed so far.
Yeah, I love the art on the card. The ability is really fun too, which we'll get into. He costs 6. He's got 5 strength.
So he's got 1 more strength than Robin Hood at the same cost, but he's got the same amount of defense.
With 4.
And his effect is very fun, because when you play him, you get to choose an opposing character and they lose 5 strength for the turn. So this essentially lets your other characters that are already on the board then attack into the character that just got its strength reduced.
Right,
and most likely your characters will take 0 or very minimal damage, and then you can easily trade out their character without losing your own. So that seems to be the value of him, just really tempo based, keeping your board alive while shutting down your opponent.
Yeah, this just also adds to the notion of maybe Sapphire being kind of an aggressive color, because if you've played out a lot of maybe weaker or lower cost units, they probably don't have the most defense in the game, but if you're able to shut down their strength on a character that you need to take out, then you can use several of your lower health, lower cost units to trade into it without losing them and maintain your board presence. So
yep, he's just one of my favorites so far,
and again, we don't know what his lore count will be. I'm imagining he will have be worth some lore on the side as well. So
yeah, I think after you get that initial effect off, then he's only a 5/4. So I'm guessing he's going to be worth, I'd say, 2 lore, but, total guess.
Yeah, and so far the strongest character, which, we'll get to soon, is Maleficent with 7 strength. So currently he would reduce at least her to no more than 2 strength for a turn, and anything less than her would be less than that. And so, yeah, it seems like a potentially strong tempo effect to help clear out maybe a big unit that's threatening. So
yes, and now moving on to Ruby, which I think looks like a very destructive, fun, just powerful ink type. We have Maleficent, the monstrous dragon, as the first card, cost of 9. Big 7 strength and 5 defense is pretty good.
This card just looks epic to me. The art.
Oh, I love the pose.
The dragon's so imposing.
The thorn forest kind of around the castle there.
Yep.
Now 2 lore only, so that's not very much lore for the cost of 9. However, it does have the Dragonfire ability, so when it's played, you get to banish a chosen character. And
love that.
As if you look off to the right, at the far right of the screen is the Dragonfire card, which has the exact same effect. It even has the same name, Dragonfire, so banish chosen character. So that effect essentially costs 5 when you play it as an action. So if we look at Maleficent's card and imagine that the Dragonfire portion of that card costs 5, then everything else that you're getting basically is costing you 4. So you're getting the 7 strength, the 5 defense, and the 2 lore.
And that's incredible stats for a cost of 4.
Absolutely.
So
a great body to get on the field. It's got a really fun flavor text down there. Why not turn into a dragon if everything else fails? And then it's a legendary, so it seems like the card makers are recognizing the strength of this card.
Yeah, it seems like it's definitely worth that rarity. And I can just say I'd be super pumped to open this up in a pack.
It does raise the question of what is the max amount of resources you're going to be able to spend in a turn? Is it 10? Some games cap out at 10. Are they going to let us go a little higher than that? But I would presume probably no more than 10 or 12, or maybe I've heard maybe some people say 15. So basically it doesn't seem like a card you're ever going to be able to play 2 of in one turn.
Right. I wouldn't be surprised if it capped out at 10. This seems like, by playing her, you're not only banishing a character. I mean, you could banish a 10 cost or 9 cost character, or, something that's really threatening, and at the same time, you're putting a 7/5 on the board. And as we'll see with Mickey Mouse up next, who's worth 4 lore, perhaps someone sends him on a quest, and they're hoping to collect 4 lore. and then you drop Maleficent and just remove the problem entirely. Even though he's evasive and you wouldn't be able to challenge him, her ability could get around that, and it just seems like so much value. So the high cost seems warranted. It'll be interesting to see, how fast some decks can be, and if you are able to last long enough to get this out without being under too much pressure that the game might end. Or, it just seems like it has potential to be a super powerful card. So
Yes, and now Mickey
Really
Mouse, the brave little tailor, is 8 costs, so almost as expensive as Maleficent, but then has 2 less strength. And his effect is evasive, so he can only be targeted by other characters that have the evasive keyword. And the really big thing to point out on him is the fact that he has 4 lore symbols on his card. So he seems like probably one of the quickest, most reliable ways to quest for a big amount of lore at one time. And then that evasive really does give him protection against most of the characters we've seen so far. The only other evasive character revealed so far is Robin Hood, who has 4 power, so cannot even clear this Mickey at this point. So Mickey seems like a card you would want to target with a Dragonfire or a Maleficent, some hard removal.
right, and he seems to be even a bigger hint toward this lore being the win condition, and being that he is a legendary and his stats are a little low for the 8 cost. That evasive though seems like it's huge for Mickey, and if that is the way to win the game, to collect lore, and they didn't save any removal spells and don't have any removal abilities in hand and don't have an evasive creature to take him out or challenge him, it seems like you could just try to collect 4 lore a turn until you've reached whatever total it is you need to win. So definitely I think that's where his legendary card rarity status and just strength of the card is coming from, for sure.
And I think he'd be fun to run with like Aurora, something like that, where she could give him ward, so that they can't just play Maleficent on him. They can't just stop him from getting that 4 lore. You're going to make them need to get something evasive down or get rid of Aurora first and then turn to Mickey.
Right, and you really protect him so he can go get you the lore you need to win the game.
So yeah, I really like that.
I love the art on the card.
Not the best for combat, but if you can set up your board just right, then I think he will quickly get you to the lore amount that you need to win.
Yeah, I think you're probably playing him to collect the lore and to try to close out the game. And if you've done a good job making them get rid of a lot of their removal and clearing their board along the way and making it a challenge for them to take him out, then it could be a great win condition and toward the top end of your deck. So then we'll move on to Mulan, who is a 5 cost with 4 strength and 5 defense, and she is the other card that comes in the gift set, and she has an ability, Lead by Example, which says during your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, your other characters get +1 lore this turn.
So she really plays into the idea that if you're using her, you'd like to make your board go as wide as possible, have as many characters down as you can, and then use her early in the turn to banish a character through combat, and therefore all the rest of your characters would gain an additional lore. So if you have 4 other characters, then the banishment of one thing gets an additional 4 lore across your board. So now even though she's only worth 1, you used her for combat instead, and then you essentially gained 4 lore on your board.
Now if you've cleared the opponent's board, and then you can safely exert your other units to try to go quest for that lore, then that would work out and really help you get closer to that win condition. And maybe you can't exert them all to go on a quest, but whichever ones you can, they're going to be worth more than they would otherwise, and just get you to that win faster. So she has a lot of potential. It could be very scary depending on how the game plays, to be against her, but she's an exciting card.
And again, I think back to Jumba, who is also a 5 cost for 4 or 5. Like, I'd rather play a Mulan type thing in my deck versus something without an effect. But again, there's going to be a place for Jumba. I don't doubt it.
If you never get the value out of her effect, then Jumba has 1 extra lore. But hers has a much bigger upside potential.
And what's fun about her is you can try to build a deck that really works around her mechanic, and getting some units down that she can easily buff would be nice. So I'm thinking more of an early to mid game type of deck with her.
So again, here is the Dragonfire, which is an action card and says for 5 cost, you may banish chosen character. And as we mentioned earlier, there is no Flourish symbol around the cost symbol. But
so we're very close to getting into our theory about that.
We do have one more card to go first, and that is Aladdin from the starter deck.
Oh, and I'd just like to say about Dragonfire too before we move on. Again, the idea of like someone paying 8 for a Mickey, and then if on the next turn your opponent plays 5 to get rid of that Mickey, it's great value, to be able to pay less than they paid for such a strong character to clear it and then use your remaining resources to kind of develop your board further. So seems like a great action card, whether or not you're going to want to, how many you're going to want in your deck, that'll, be something we need to figure out.
Or how many we're allowed to play as well. But yeah, we don't know play sets yet. Are we able to have 2 of a card in a deck, 3, 4? A lot of games have it at 4. So,
but I'm so excited to find out the actual rules for the deck construction and the restrictions, and just really start theory crafting. What are some of the best ideas we can come up with?
So here we have Aladdin again, probably from the starter deck. As you can see, he is wearing the ruby symbol, and again, there's what appears to be some ruby ink swirling around in the sky. So we are presuming him to be a Floodborn super rare card in the starter deck, being paired with that Cruella.
And the green Aladdin, which we assume will be in that deck, so that he can kind of evolve into this form for a cheaper cost. So yeah, I've always liked Aladdin. I know you have too, and I think I like the the art on this one. It's the sky is pretty cool in the back. It's got that ruby tinge to it towards the bottom there, and so yeah, I'm excited to see how he plays.
Yeah. So now we'll just touch on our theory for this having no flourish around the cost symbol for Dragonfire and Hades.
Let's go back to the Hades card first, since he's the only character that has this. So if you look at Hades again, he costs 8, and he does not have the golden flourish. And we were kind of discussing earlier tonight what we thought that could mean. We know there's a lot of theories out there in the community about, is it possibly a different resource requirement that we need to meet?
Are there 2 resource systems or just 1?
Different things like that, but
that could be.
What we eventually decided might be how this works is that if it does not have the golden flourish symbol, that the game is telling us we can only have 1 copy of this card in play at a time. So if you look at Hades' effect, he gets 1 lore for every other villain character you have in play. So imagine a scenario where you have like 3 of this guy sitting on your field.
And they're each giving the other one an extra lore, and it's just kind of compounding really quickly across the board and reaching, your win condition maybe too quickly. And they have a lot of defense, so it'd be
like he's a higher defense. Yeah, he has a high defensive stat. You could in theory get him out when you have 6 resources. So that's very early to have such a powerful stat.
And if you just kind of sit on him and, don't exert him, just kind of let him sit there protected, unless they have removal for him and you were able to, let's say, play out a Hades every turn for a few turns, then all of a sudden, you could ramp the lore counts very quickly. And it just seems like a potential way to balance that. Kind of like in the My Hero Academia card game, there's a keyword called unique, which means you can only have 1 of that card on board at the time. That's our theory for what this means. So
flourish. Basically the game makers may have looked at this and said, if we have more than 1 Hades in play on the same side of the field at a time, it just becomes too powerful, too aggressive towards getting you closer to your win condition. So they may be saying here, we're going to not put the flourish around his cost, and that alerts the players that you can only use 1 at a time.
And then if we take a look at the other,
and then the focus becomes, supporting him with other villain characters that are not Hades. Of course, if this Hades is removed, we definitely believe you can play a different version of this same guy down the next turn. But the point being, you can only have 1 in play at a time.
Right.
So once we kind of came up with that idea, we thought we better look through all the cards and see which other ones did not have the Flourish, and does this still make sense? So as you can see, Magic Mirror is an item card that does not have the Flourish around the cost. And so could this be that, just like Hades, we think you can only have one Magic Mirror in play on your side of the field?
Because we're imagining if you had two in play, and the game state was in such a way where you could be drawing two cards every turn, and maybe you and your opponent are both top decking, and all of a sudden you're getting to draw your card at the start plus then two off of each of these, and pretty soon you're just way outvaluing them with card draw and getting to see all your cards and having way more options, and that it could get out of hand depending on the speed of the game. I mean, obviously it might be pretty slow to invest in playing down a lot of Magic Mirrors and then paying their cost to draw cards, but it is potential to have too much card draw, maybe to just be a little out of balance. So to curb that and keep players more on an even level, we think it does make sense that this one does not have the Flourish, and that it might be limited to only one on board at a time.
Yeah, because I mean, if everyone's down to basically no hand or drawing one card per turn typically, and if you're sitting on two Magic Mirrors, suddenly your one card becomes three, and the next turn you get three more cards, and if that's how you want to spend your resources, and you should just be able to really outvalue the opponent that way. Right. So
it might realistically not be.
I think it makes sense to curb the amount of card draw you can do off of just this one card. And so that's why we feel the Flourish is not on this card.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're in a really slow matchup where the opponent isn't, developing too quickly, you might not feel like you can afford to ever use this twice in a turn anyway. But, in case you were in that scenario, it does seem like a good way to, curb the card draw a little bit, to just limit it to the one.
And then we were looking through the rest of the cards and noticed that there is one other one that does not have a Flourish, and it is the Dragonfire. And so we thought about this for a little bit and figured out that we would imagine it means you can only play one copy of this card on a turn. Mm-hmm. So because an action doesn't sit on board,
it's not like in play like the Glimmer.
There's never going to be two in play at the same time. But once you've played this card on your turn, the lack of a Flourish could signify you only get to play this once on a turn. Therefore, the effect is so strong to banish a character, they may not want you to be able to banish two characters when you have 10 resources.
Right, like imagine that scenario where maybe they have Aurora down, and then they have Brave Little Tailor Mickey as well. And, that's a 5-cost unit and an 8-cost unit they invested in, and now, for the cost of 10, if you were able to just play one, banish the Aurora, and then play the other and banish the Mickey, probably doesn't feel too good to be on the receiving end of that. Or maybe you have, a Maleficent and a Gantu out, let's just say, and then they use a 5-cost card to banish your 9-cost Maleficent, and then they do it again to banish your 8-cost Gantu. Probably just doesn't feel as good, and as a potential way to limit that, we could see it making sense that it doesn't have the Flourish. I guess we're limited to only one play per turn. So
yeah, I think we've all played card games, or like Hearthstone, for example, just different games like that, where it just feels so bad when you get wrecked essentially by like overpowered cards and like too many of them in too quick of a succession.
Or maybe you have a full board and they play one spell that just wipes the entire board that you've worked hard to build.
All your value's gone in a moment. And so
especially in this game where we think that you're probably trying to accumulate the lore off of your characters or glimmers you're playing, and so to just remove too many of them in one turn for the cost of 5, which doesn't seem too high.
Yeah, another thing I would point out is if you're playing a really, let's say, an aggressive red deck, and you kind of build the board the whole time and your opponent is struggling to keep up, and then once you've got everything in place, they drop down a couple of big creatures to try to deal with what you've got going, and then they just say, oh no, I've been sitting on these Dragonfires all game, and then suddenly they have nothing, and you've got your full board to go crazy for lore with. So I think it makes sense to kind of curb the power of this card by limiting you to only playing it once per turn.
Yep.
And so versus like Healing Glow, that has the Flourish. All it does is remove 2 damage. How impactful is that going to be? Probably definitely not anywhere near as impactful as Dragonfire. So with that being said, these are just some clues we think kind of lead us to believe that
Right,
lack of a flourish means one card in play at a time if it's an item or a character, something that sits on board, or one play per turn if it's an action card or something that goes, straight to your discard pile.
Right, and this might not be correct, but that's just our current hypothesis about it. And
yeah, and we're excited to see, like, as new cards are revealed, we'll be looking really closely at, does it have a flourish, does it not, and then kind of keeping these ideas in mind.
yeah, because if
seeing
you
if
look
that
at
makes sense.
if you look at Mulan, she's got a similar effect to Hades, but she does have the flourish. But we do think the effect is still quite a bit different, because for her, it's whenever this character banishes another character, your other characters get +1, and it seems a little more difficult to pull off, let's say, than Hades. Plus, she can't collect lore for herself. It's just her other units if she's managed to banish. So if you were to say, let's have a couple Mulans on board, it seems
you're
like
probably
it's
using
less,
both of them to banish, and you're not getting lore from them, and so then you're ultimately...
It might not grow as exponentially as the Hades might.
Whereas Hades, it's just like, how many villains do I have? So every single Hades getting buffed by how many villains you have. They're just helping each other. They're helping themselves.
They're helping all your villains. So it might get out of hand. So yep, that's kind of, we think it still checks out based on all the cards we've seen so far. And yeah, I'm curious to see as they reveal more if our theory still seems correct to us.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear, like, in the comments below, do you think that theory has merit, that flourish cards, you can play as many as you can put in a deck, on the field or in one turn, etc., whereas the cards without flourishes are only one at a time on board and single play per turn? So let us know if you agree with that, or if you think that that's going to turn out to be incorrect. We'd like to hear your theories too.
Yeah, and we thought we'd just end on something fun. So, we've seen some Floodborn characters so far as we went through the cards that have been revealed. And they seem to be, reimagined or alternate versions of the characters we know and love, and that have kind of diverged from their original story. So we thought we'd just create one ourselves for fun, and then see if you guys had any ideas of any Floodborns you'd like to see in the game. So leave that in the comments too. But for our example...
What did we come up with?
Yeah, we came up with Beast, Forever Cursed. And basically, Belle did not get to him in time. They didn't break the curse. And so now he's kind of lost all shreds of hope that he had left, that he would ever be human again, and kind of some of his humanity with it. So maybe the art of the card's really dark, and he's kind of more rabid and wild, and, a little more dangerous, and maybe a really strong, big statted card, but he's a little out of control, so maybe there could be a slight risk or drawback to playing him too. But I think there'd be some really cool potential for the art, where maybe he's kind of tearing his castle apart, and the glass vase with the rose could be
shattered, and the rose petals just kind
laying on the ground where you can see the last petal has fallen. I
think
there's
everywhere.
A lot of cool potential there, and we do know, since the wardrobe has been revealed, that there will be some Beauty and the Beast cards in the game. So you never know, but it's not an alternate reality I'd wish on the Beast, but I do think it'd make for an interesting card. But yeah, let us know in the comments if you have any ideas for Floodborn card designs of your own. And
yeah, so thank you guys so much for sticking around this long, if you're still with us.
Yeah, it was a little winded this time, but
yeah, going forward we're going to do shorter videos, but we just kind of wanted to get out some of our initial impressions of the cards and some of our assumptions about the gameplay, just kind of get that out there before we proceed with some videos we'll do in the future. And we'll probably do about one video per week is kind of our thoughts right now, or more, depending on if there's a lot of stuff being revealed. But
right.
For now, we're just kind of excited to see the new information as it comes out from the makers of Lorcana, and we're very excited about this game. And again, thank you very much for watching.
Yep, thanks for watching.
We'll see you next time.
Yep, peace.